아리백 한국형 정책 지원 발표.
Thank you all for coming to today's policy message launch event. I am from COSIF. My name is Seo Seung-hyun and I'll be your MC today. I have some housekeeping announcement. For today's event, we have simultaneous interpretation being provided. Please turn to channel 1 for Korean and channel 2 for English. And please turn off your cell phone to silent mode for the smooth proceeding of the event. First, I want to thank all the participants for coming to today's event despite your busy schedule. For today's event, we are here to commemorate the South Korea RE100 localized policy message, and we have many presentations and discussions. I hope that today's event can serve to gather the civil society and the industry together to achieve the carbon neutrality in Korea. For today's event, we also have it streamed on YouTube. And let me now go through the program of the day. From 1 p.m. until 1:10, we will have opening remarks, and it will be followed by the keynote speech on the localized policy messages for Korea. And it will be followed by our renewable energy target and distribution and PPA facilitation measures, 30 minutes each, and have a Q&A after that. From 2:05, we will have panel discussion until 3 p.m. It will be followed by Q&A session, and then we will have the closing remarks. Now we will go into the policy message launch event. First, we have Climate Group RE100 co-lead Oliver Wilson to deliver his opening remarks. Please give him a big hand.
교수님을 단상으로 모시겠습니다.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Hello, my name is Ollie Wilson and I'm the co-lead of RE100 at the Climate Group. RE100 is a global initiative that aims to accelerate the change to zero carbon grids globally by 2040. And we do that by, our work is really focused around aiming for corporates to be able to source 100% renewable electricity globally. Currently, we've got about 400 members globally, and they've all committed to being able to source renewable electricity by 2050 or sooner. I'm really pleased to be here today to be able to launch the localized policy messages for South Korea. South Korea, it is the 8th largest electricity consuming country in the world, but only 4.7% of the electricity on the grid comes from renewables. This lack of progress is not only working against South Korea's economic interests, but it is holding back progress to net zero globally. So we have now 29 headquartered companies based in South Korea and over 50 global companies with operations in South Korea. They have all set a target of 100% renewable electricity by 2050 or sooner. So there's a real need to increase renewable electricity for these companies. Our members often cite barriers in South Korea, including high cost of buying renewables, a lack of procurement options, or just general market frictions that make it complicated and tough to procure renewable electricity. So currently, on our latest annual report, in Korea, only 2% of our members' electricity consumption comes from renewable electricity. And I'm just going to compare that to other countries in the region at the moment. So in China, that is 32% of electricity consumption comes from renewables for our members. In Singapore, that is 26%. And in Japan, that's 15%. And you can compare that to South Korea at the moment of 2%. But there's reason to be hopeful, and there is progress being made. So we did write to President Yoon earlier in the winter to urge him and his government to take decisive and swift action on renewables. And we have seen progress from successive governments on advancing renewable procurement options for corporates, including the introduction of power purchase agreements recently, or PPAs. We would encourage further steps like this. Korean companies want more. So we would urge greatly the South Korean government to increase the affordability, the accessibility, and the availability of renewables to corporates, and to increase that share of wind and solar on the grid. It is absolutely clear now that the age of cheap fossil fuels is over. We are in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, which will be centered around renewable electricity. Now, South Korea took advantage of the third industrial revolution, which was based around digital and electronic technology, and really was able to capitalize off the back of that and set up an export-orientated country, which has brought great prosperity to South Korea. Now, with the century coming, in order to remain competitive globally and as an export-orientated country, it's clear that South Korea needs to become a leader in renewables in Asia. So I'm proud today to be able to present later the localized policy messages for South Korea. And these are very practical steps that can be taken to ensure South Korea stays as a leader in renewable electricity. Just to mention, please feel free to tweet about and share the event on your social channels using the RE100 Twitter handle, which is at the RE100 or at the RE Bay. Thank you very much, and I look forward to presenting the policy hours later.
Thank you for your remarks. Now we will invite the Director of COSIF, Yang Chun-seung, for his opening remarks. Nice to meet you. I am Carl C.S. Yang, as just introduced. So here we are having the Korea Localized Policy Message launch event, and thank you for coming and welcome to the event. As you know, today's event is being co-hosted by Climate Group and Solutions for Our Climate and COSIF, and we are discussing ways to expand the use of renewable energy in Korea and creating a common document to present it to the government. The climate change is one of the most urgent issues faced by the whole society, and companies need to convert to renewable energy by 100%, and this RE100 is one of the most efficient ways to achieve the carbon neutrality. RE100 is actually one of the preconditions requested by importers in foreign countries to exporters of Korea, and it is also contributing to creating the condition to expand the use of renewable energy. And this will help the competitiveness of Korean companies and contribute to resolving the climate issue that we are all faced with. However, if you consider how the government is responding, we can see that it is a little bit tepid or not being very proactive. If you consider the 10th basic plan for the electricity, you can see that the government is targeting only 36% of the total grid, which is even lower than the 30.2% of the previous government. So we need to accelerate, but the government is decelerating. And if you consider the power grid or the exchange market for renewable energy, there are many things to be improved. We need to resolve those issues to allow smoother transition to RE100 for our companies and facilitate the business relations between Korean companies and foreign buyers. Considering our reality, we are here together, the civil society, academia, and industry, to discuss policy messages to be delivered to the government to galvanize our transition to RE100. I sincerely wish that today's event can be utilized very well so that we can come up with very fruitful results. And I look forward to your active participation. Lastly, I want to thank the presenters and discussants who are here despite your busy schedule. And I also want to thank the hosts for today's event. Thank you.
네,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Yang, for your remark. Next, I would like to invite Kahi Han from Solutions for Our Climate for her opening remarks. Please give her a warm round of applause. Good afternoon. I am Kahi Han of the Solutions for Our Climate. First of all, I would like to welcome and thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule today to participate in the RE100 Localized Policy Messages launch event. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Climate Group, RE100, and also COSIF for your cooperation in organizing this event. RE100 and the use of renewable energy are the issues that have attracted the most attention. The main reason for this attention is that the use of corporate renewable energy is the game changer that can most effectively curb the rise in global temperatures at this time. Also, renewable energy is also a source of corporate competitiveness as well as industrial competitiveness. As you know, the EU carbon border tax is scheduled to be piloted from October this year. So such regulation, the carbon tax, are coming closer to reality. And 3 of the 10 largest companies in Korea are being asked for RE100 by their clients. The use of renewable energy itself is now becoming a new trade barrier. However, unfortunately, companies that have set out to secure renewable energy in the domestic market are facing deepening troubles. This is because procuring renewable energy in Korea is particularly expensive and difficult. There is a fundamental issue if we look into the proliferation of the renewable energy. One is the complicated licensing regulation, and also the central government policies are slowing the speed of renewable energy deployment. And also the monopolistic domestic electricity market centered on thermal power generation. These are all the factors that impede fair competition for renewable energy. The world already has 2/3 of its population living in countries where wind and solar are the cheapest sources of energy. If we look at the past 5 years and if we look into the data, corporate procurement of renewable energy worldwide has increased by 50% annually. Our competitors, customers, are on the fast track to achieving RE100. So what does this mean? Where is Korea at? The RE100 needs of companies can also bring a new dimension to domestic renewable energy policy. For this to happen, it is important that companies voice their opinion. If companies can have a real voice for the system change, then they can create change. The looming financial burden and reputational risk for companies are more obvious than ever. Therefore, it is only natural for companies to demand fair access to renewable energy to the government. And this is in close contact with the policy messages that we have been very carefully drafting. And this will be the first step towards carbon neutrality. We hope that today's discussion will serve as a starting point to examine the effectiveness of the current RE100 policy regime and to encourage businesses and civil societies to create more substantive renewable energy policies in their governments. We will also actively push to spur the preparation of more effective corporate renewable energy use and policies. Once again, thank you so much for your time and thank you for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kahi-han, for your remarks. And now we will have keynote speech. To start with, we have the co-lead of Climate Group, Oliver Wilson, to present on the localized policy message for Korea. Please give him a big hand. So, Mr. Oliver, please come onto the stage once again.
Hello again. I'm honoured to be able to present today these localised policy messages for South Korea. It's been a great process that we've gone through alongside our South Korean partners, SFOC and COSIF. And firstly, thank you to all of you today for your time in coming to hear more about these messages. I'd just like to start just to give a bit of context around what are localised policy messages that we do with RE100 and why they have been developed. So RE100 members, as in our member companies, look to policymakers to enact policy measures that support corporate procurement of renewable electricity and enable a competitive market for businesses to be able to buy renewables. So globally, and not a country level, but globally, RE100 has developed 6 global policy messages that support corporate sourcing of renewable electricity generally. And these are endorsed by RE100 member companies. They are essentially a checklist of things that we want countries to do to be able to ensure accessibility, affordability, and availability of renewable electricity to companies in that country. They're very high-level messages, and they're globally applicable. In other words, you could sort of see these as our key messages to policymakers globally. However, given sort of different contexts in countries around the world, we then look to translate these to a national level. So again, recognizing the need to accelerate progress in South Korea, but also the unique challenges in the market here, we undertook a collaborative consultation process in order to understand these common barriers that companies face in South Korea to sourcing renewable electricity. And this has then enabled us to develop these localized policy messages for South Korea, so translating those global RE100 messages into a localized message for the South Korean market, and really applicable to the South Korean context. And we'll go into each message sort of one by one now. Just to say, these messages, they represent ultimately the action required by the South Korean government to meet the needs of the entire RE100 membership, which has over 77 terawatt hours of electricity annually, and that associated investment in South Korea as well. These messages take into account the unique situation of South Korea and represent proposed solutions that a variety of stakeholders think can work here. This process was led by a representative group of RE100 Korean companies, also some global companies that have operations in South Korea, and was centered around organizations that I mentioned earlier, COSIF, SFOC, ourselves at Climate Group and RE100, and CREF as well. This also, as I mentioned, involved wider consultation with other stakeholders in the renewable electricity space in South Korea. So we'd like to think these have developed some proposed solutions that can really move forward further corporate procurement of electricity that has wider benefits for everyone in the space. So let's move on to the messages themselves. So the first message that we have here, or that was on the screen here, there we go, is our ask number one for the South Korean government, and that is to create a policy environment with a fair and transparent power market structure that enables renewables to compete on an equal footing to fossil fuels. So we're very much, with this message, looking for that level playing field where renewables can compete equally with fossil fuels. Part of this policy ask is to shift pricing to ensure it reflects the true cost of renewable energy production. As Gahi mentioned earlier, in most countries around the world now, wind and solar is the cheapest form of electricity. So if pricing can be shifted to reflect that true cost, we're going to see pricing benefits to Korean companies. Additionally, under this point, we would like to strengthen independence and sustainability considerations within the electricity systems operator. So this is our first policy ask, which is, again, to create a policy environment with a fair and transparent power market structure to enable renewables to compete on an equal footing to fossil fuels. There we go. Okay, so policy ask number two is to increase the renewable energy target and implement stable policy frameworks to accelerate corporate uptake of renewable electricity. Again, this has two parts to it, as you'll see on the right, to increase the renewable energy target in line with the 2050 carbon neutrality goal, and also to include wording around the expansion of power purchase agreements, or PPAs, in any government roadmap. You'll be hearing more about this particular point around the target from Eun-Byul Jo, the lead of the RE permitting team at Solutions for Our Climate later on. So just to touch on the target briefly, the 2030 target for new and renewable energy has been decreased recently to 21.6%, down from 30.2%. Which was a goal set in the NDC, or the Nationally Determined Contribution Plan, in December 2021. So it's recently, last year, just been taken down by the South Korean government. However, research does suggest that we could have a target of at least 35% by 2030 for South Korea, that is what's needed in order to be in line with the 2050 carbon neutrality goal. This reduced target that the South Korean government has done will not be sufficient for meeting renewable electricity demand in South Korea. There's no two ways about it. It will not be enough. And as I mentioned earlier, in November last year, RE100 wrote to President Yoon, urging him and his government to take decisive action on this, and that target needs to be increased. We received lots of good media coverage over that letter, and also had a swift response from the government on this too. Policy ask number 3. So this is to remove obstacles to improve accessibility of power purchase agreements for corporates. And there's a few parts to this too. So firstly, to ensure network usage fees and incidental costs are fair and transparent. Additionally, to remove unfair contractual obligations. And finally, to simplify negotiation procedures and provide clear guidelines to support corporates through the procurement process. And again, on this particular policy ask, you'll be hearing more later from Seung-Jin Kang, the Professor Emirates Tech University of Korea, who will go into this one in a bit more detail later. Just to mention in terms of PPAs, according to research commissioned by the Korea Power Exchange, the power market system operator here in South Korea, South Korean companies' most preferred option to procure renewable energy is through direct PPAs. So this is very important to Korean companies. And we have seen earlier this year that KEPCO, the Korea Electric Power Corporation, introduced the Renewable Energy Users Electricity Rate. This rate will apply to corporations who have signed either trilateral or direct PPA arrangements for a portion of their electricity and purchased the remainder from KEPCO. KEPCO have delayed the implementation of this pricing scheme until further notice. This newly introduced pricing scheme does risk increasing the financial burden on corporations, which could make PPAs less attractive instead of more accessible. So it's very important that this is addressed, given that this is what South Korean companies want. Okay, on to the next policy ask. So ask number 4 is to enhance grid flexibility and fairness for renewable electricity generators to scale the domestic supply of renewable electricity. And again, on the right, you'll see there are 2 further parts to this. It's to ensure equal grid access and fair compensation for renewable electricity generators, and to promote investment in systems that increase grid flexibility and to allow renewables to rapidly scale up. This is absolutely essential to future-proof the electricity system going forward. Higher level of renewables or higher proportion of renewables will mean that grid flexibility is needed. So it's better to look at this in the future and to take proactive steps towards this. And really, this ask is essentially around creating an environment to provide and promote the investment needed for this type of system and to provide certainty for that investment. On to policy ask number 5. And that is to improve the renewables investment environment for on-site and off-site PPAs. And again, on the right, you will see 3 further parts to this. So firstly, to streamline siting and permitting rules, improve cost effectiveness of investment, and to provide clarity around incidental costs associated with on-site and off-site PPAs. And again, around this issue, and particularly around permitting, you'll be hearing more later from Eunbeo Jo from Solutions for Our Climate on this, and also from Seung-Jin Kang as well. So this will be covered in a bit more detail later too. And in terms of this streamlining of the rules around siting and permitting, this is very much a key bottleneck at the moment. The 10th Basic Plan includes plans to strengthen the assessment of the power system in the renewable electricity permitting process through adoption of an additional system impact evaluation. And while at the same time also reconsidering the current policy that allows small-scale solar PV projects unlimited access to the grid. These plans could actually further complicate the process rather than streamlining it. So there are concerns there too. But again, later we'll be going into far more detail on this. And finally, well, last but not least, the final policy message. And that is to enhance the transparency, sustainability, and additionality of renewable electricity certificates and tracking systems. Just before I go into the further detail, this is something that very much underpins any credible claim of renewable electricity use that a corporation makes. So it is important that this is done well. So to go into the further detail here of the 4 points on the right, firstly, we're asking to differentiate between different renewable sources of power under green premiums in advance of auctions. Additionally, then to improve the use of green premium proceeds towards additional renewable capacity. Well, that's very important. You can see how that could increase further investment in renewable electricity if you can tie that back round. And then, again, to increase frequency of green premium auctions. This has been a key thing we have heard from our companies. Essentially, it's just not enough. And then finally, to embed sustainability measures attached to biomass for green premiums and RECs to make sure that this is genuinely renewable. So they are the 6 localized policy messages for South Korea. You might wonder, how are we going to use these going forward in South Korea? Like, what are we now going to do with them now that we have them? RE100 alongside SFOC and COSIF are keen to ensure that the government and decision makers are equipped to make informed decisions around achieving these changes in the policy and regulatory environment that will ultimately enable this shift to renewables. So going forward, we will be working with our members to push the government and push for more renewables and to see these localized policy messages for South Korea, that they are realized. So we'll be working towards that. Following this event today, we'll be sharing with MOTI these policy messages, and we want to see the South Korean government taking proactive action to drive renewables. As I mentioned earlier, these policy messages are very much a to-do list or practical steps that the South Korean government can take to be a leader in renewable electricity in Asia. And as mentioned earlier, this is essential for South Korean companies in order to stay competitive. These messages will enable the government to drive forward the energy transition to renewables. And over the coming year, we hope to see these messages are enacted by the South Korean government. Thank you very much. I will now pass on to the next speaker.
네, 올리버 윌슨님의 발표 감사드립니다.
Thank you for Mr. Oliver Wilson for that presentation. Next, I would like to introduce Eun-Byeol-jo from the Solutions for Our Climate, and she will be presenting about the RE target and supply from the perspective of RE permitting and siting. Please welcome her with a big round of applause. Thank you. I am Eun-Byeol-jo, and I'm in the team of the RE permitting and siting. I know I have a very large presentation in front of me, so I will start without further ado. First, let's look into the RE target and supply. As Oliver briefly mentioned, according to the Ember research, as of 2021, the actual renewable energy penetration is not sufficient to meet the electricity needs of a single major company. As you can see from the graph on the right-hand side, we're at the bottom low of only 4.7% of the renewable energy share within the electricity grid. And again, the 10th Basic Electricity Plan said that the renewable energy should be at least 21.6%, and it has been further lowered than before. And if we look at the RPS of the RE100 member companies and the other top 30 companies, of RE100, then it means that the generation share should be at least 25%. And if you look at the top 30 companies in terms of the electricity use, and if the RPS 100 is 61.8, then the generation share should be heightened or increased to 34%. And considering the demand from other sectors such as buildings, the target for renewable energy supply should be more than 35%. As we've just heard from Oliver, in the local policy message, there are many messages that is targeted for a stable procurement of renewable energy. And recently, we have talked a lot about how much renewable energy is actually required. And according to that research result, max was 54% and the lowest was 34%, and that is what is required by 2030. So the 21.6% that we have set forth for year 2030 is far low than what is required. So RE's target is important, but how can we increase the cost effectiveness of RE through different policies? Many of the companies talked about the high price of renewable energy. And as you well know, in order to reduce the cost of renewable energy, the renewable energy needs to be widely penetrated. However, as you've seen in the previous presentation, we only have 4.7% of RE in our electricity grid. According to Bloomberg, whenever the accumulated generations of wind power doubles, then we can see that the turbine price is lowered by 10%. And for this to be enabled, the first is to have a easier licensing and permission procedure. And that should be accompanied by favorable policies. And that is how we can actually lower the price for renewable energy. If you look at overseas examples, we can find many examples of where the permission or the regulation has been eased. As you can see from the EU, for the urgent supply of repower in 2022, the renewable energy license period was shortened to a maximum of 2 years. This was the case of the EU. And even in the UK, with the announcement of the UK's energy security strategy, the licensing period for offshore wind, which is currently sits around 4 years, has been reduced to 1 year. But what is happening in Korea? Let's look at the permitting in Korea. It is a very complicated, pricey, and exhaustive process. Compared to France, it is 9 times longer and higher. And because it takes a longer period, many cases are pending, and sometimes the applicant just kind of drops out during the process because it takes such a long time. We looked at all the companies that were permitted or who have applied for the permission in the past 10 years. And out of 70 applications, only 4 received the final permission. There has been an ongoing effort to actually deregulate. However, the actual number of regulations, on the contrary, increased. Let's first look at the solar energy. There are roughly 2 regulations that it has to go through. First, they would need to get a permission to work as a generator, which sits under the Electric Utility Act. And then they would need to abide to the Electric Power Source Development Promotion Act, and then also the National Land Planning and Utilization Act, because setting up this kind of facility also falls under the installation of structures as stipulated in the local law. And this permission is given by the municipalities. So let's look at some of the examples of how the siting regulation has been set up. So this is one example. As you can see, the solar panel should not be within 800 meters of any straight load express highway or freeway. It says 800 meters, but as you know, the road goes both ways, so it means that it can be near or distant, at least 1.6 kilometers. So let's look at all the roads that are present in Korea. These are the number of roads. We can see that many of the municipalities have been upholding this kind of a standard. So for like Chungcheong-do, it has 100%. And some of the municipalities also set a siting regulation for agricultural or farming roads. And again, this kind of a facility cannot be installed any place near residential areas. How does this regulation impact the actual installation of facilities? If we look at Gumi City, which is a typical metropolitan agricultural complex area, it has a 500-meter siting distance. And with this, it means that the area available for any solar installation will be decreased by 93%. And apart from any forestry areas in Gumi, only 0.09% of areas is available for the solar installation. So that means that there is realistically not a single area where solar installation can take place. In other jurisdictions, there aren't areas or that have this kind of a regulation.
So if we are to ease this siting regulation, how much more potential can we get from solar PV? This is the average of the siting regulation. It's like 300 meters. And if we reduce it to 100 meters, we can have 235 gigawatts of solar PV. And based on the 2030 power demand expectation made by local governments, actually they can satisfy about half of the 2030 power demand. So we talk about expanding the solar power and other renewables. However, just by easing this siting regulation, we can supply about half of the power demand. And how can we ease this regulation? Regarding the distance between the facilities, actually we need to get the approval from the government to allow the site to be used for the renewable energy. And if you look at the details of the regulation, it says that the introduction of the siting should be based on the new Renewable Energy Act, and the specifics should be based on the upper laws. Actually, the easing of this siting regulation was mentioned from years ago. Even in 2020, the MOTI also had the outsourced study on this, how they can ease the regulation on siting, and also like last year they also had proposals about the siting regulation relaxation. However, why isn't this happening? Well, to ease the regulation, there are some preconditions, and one of the preconditions is the residents' acceptance. Yet, if you look at details of the acceptance issue, some residents are opposing to this because of the natural preservation or a scenic hindrance, and some others are just listening to some fake news, and some are because they are farmers and they don't want to damage their cropland. So it means that these different opinions do not represent the whole opinion, and the government should be coming up with response measures for different groups of residents. And to do that, we need to have very serious social discussion, but that is not being carried out. And this problem as a whole is being regarded as an acceptance issue. So there are some higher laws in Korea stipulating the protection of certain areas. If you look at the table on left, there are regulations on the protection of commercial land or green land or wetland. Excluding those preserved areas or conserved areas, you will see the red area, like 75% of the whole Korean land. And if you look at other countries, they also have protection for certain areas like prime farmland that are stipulated under the higher law. And in case of Korea, we are having these laws on protection of woodland and farmland. And excluding that, we only have those blue dots left. And for those blue dotted areas, we believe that the siting should be allowed. I have covered the solar PV, and now I'll briefly touch upon the offshore wind. Well, compared to 2030 target, we only have like 1% of the capacity of the offshore wind at the current date. However, based on 2022, our offshore wind capacity permit is like 20.8 gigawatts, which is 173%. It means that there are many permits issued, but the capacity is very low. And where does the gap come from? We have analyzed where all those projects are standing for all the projects that have already received the permit. So you can see that the biggest obstacle is in the transmission contract, followed by the environmental impact survey and all the following procedures. Out of total of 70 projects, only 4 have received the final permit. In case of this offshore wind, actually in the previous slide, we have separated the permit procedures into 4 different stages. However, in reality, they need to get about 10 different they need to go to 10 different agencies to get about 21 different permits and licenses. So we don't have any one single channel to get through that process. So we can look into the 2008 Business Complex Permit Special Act. At that time, the government has enacted this act to expand the industrial complexes. Based on actually at the time, industrial complexes had to get approval based on 40 different acts. However, to facilitate the industrial complexes, the government has streamlined it. And I believe that for the onshore and offshore, we need to introduce something similar to that. And there are other needs for a unified regulation. Currently, for the offshore wind, starting from the siting to the whole development process, a private operator is taking the lead. And that is why there are conflict with the residents, including fishers, are intensified. However, when there are those residential acceptance issues or other conflicts, they actually cannot go into the procedure of receiving the permit. And there is no ground for the public institution to get more actively involved in resolving that conflict. So what is happening in other countries? It's the government that is taking the lead in discovering the right location for the wind farm. They look into various factors like economic factors and social factors so that they can have better acceptance, and also would be easier to achieve the target level. For that kind of designated areas, they select the operator, which also contributes to reducing the cost. And they also have one-stop shop for permits to eradicate any issues related to flexibility or clarity of the process. So what we need to do here is also to have the public tender for the process and select operators for the pre-designed areas. And that is only for the offshore wind, and have one channel for permitting process. What I have mentioned so far is already proposed at the National Assembly, but they are still pending for like over 2 years, and we need to accelerate the passage of those proposals to expand the wind power capacity. Just to sum up, in case of solar PV, we need to revise laws to relax the siting regulation and enhance the residents' acceptance. I mentioned the siting regulation is like 5 meters distance. It means that within 500 meters, the siting cannot be granted, but in like 510 meters apart, the siting is allowed. So the specifics should be more clarified. And in case of wind, what we need to do is to have the government-led system to expand the power, wind power, and simplify the permitting process. Just by easing the regulation, we can have additional wind power potential of 235 gigawatts, as just mentioned. And in case of the offshore wind, we can have 20.8 gigawatts. Well, here you can see that it was covered last year. The German government said that about 2% of its land will be dedicated to wind power. And the government said that its wind power proportion will go up to 80% of the total grid. It did the R&D on what kind of measures are needed to achieve that 80%. And based on the research, it has come up with this goal of setting 2% of the land for wind power. And if the local governments are not taking the leadership in this regard, the central government can forcefully use certain land of the local government for wind power. While in Korea, we have certain tasks or policies or ideas being presented to facilitate the use of renewable energy, but I think the specific policy measures are needed to make them come into reality. Thank you for your presentation, Eun-byeol-cho. Please give her another big round of applause.
이어서 세 번째
Next, our third speaker is Professor Seung-jin Kang of the Tech University of Korea. He'll be talking about ways to expand the PPA for renewable energy. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
예, 안녕하세요.
Hello, I'm very honored to be here at this very meaningful event. Today, I will talk about the renewable energy PPA and how to expand it further. And from September to 2019, I have been the chairman of the electricity board, and I did give permit to hundreds of these generators. But unfortunately, as Eun-byeol-cho just mentioned in her presentation, from 2001 to 2022, among all the generators that got the permit, only 20% are still up and running. Some are still pending, some have gone out of business. So I believe that there needs to be some fundamental system change. Even if all the generators with the permit are up and running, I do believe that we can actually increase the renewable energy by fourfold. Now let's move on to the presentation. I just wanted to share some of the research that I have conducted last year. I did interview and survey many of the companies who wanted to take part in the PPA but had some challenges in doing so, and this is kind of like a synthesized version of that. Something that you already know, but one thing that I do want to point out is that one of RE100's achievement is getting this renewable energy. Some are doing self-generations, but many are interested in joining the PPA and seeking ways to join that. But as Oliver mentioned, why is it so difficult in Korea to purchase renewable energy? I want to stress the word easily or conveniently. What is actually blocking that? And why is renewable energy so expensive in Korea? The prime example of that, we have to go back to the price that we're seeing at KPX, which is S&P plus REP, and that is around 301. But KEPCO price is around 151. So you have to pay double to get the same amount of electricity. So how can we actually bridge this kind of a price discrepancy, because it acts as a financial burden for many of the companies? The way I've conducted this research is that, of course, there were literature surveys and we conducted interviews with many of the PPA participating companies. There were many talks before with many civil societies, but I think it really started to get some headway as the Electric Business Act was legislated in July 2020, and then there was an also introduction about the PPA. But it also took about a year till the PPA was substantially introduced and the structure was somewhat confirmed. As you know, in the electricity market, KEPCO was the monopoly in the energy market, but having the PPA means that now the consumers have the means to kind of skip KEPCO and still purchase the power from the power market. So I know that in this process, there were many conflicts and there were many discussions, exhaustive discussions around that. So PPA, as you know, is the power purchase agreement. And in Korea, there are actually three forms of PPA. One is small PPAs for under 1 millimegawatt, and they can directly sell it to KEPCO. And KEPCO, after every month, they will calculate how much they have actually received, and it will calculate based on S&P plus REC. But that is kind of not applicable to what we're discussing, because we're talking about the corporate PPA, because these small ones are something that is also getting some subsidy from the government. And next is another PPA where there is a renewable energy PPA agreement from the company and the actual energy supplier. As you can see here, so this shows the power market of Korea. So all the small generators sell their electricity to KEPCO. But for the third-party PPA, they have to withdraw from the power market. So all the electricity needs to go to like a middleman or a utility company, an operator. So if it's under 1 megawatt, then they go to KEPCO. If it goes beyond that, they can go to other means to sell into power market. But once they exceed a certain electricity generating amount, they have to withdraw from the power market, and that has become a big struggle. The government has introduced a direct PPA, and as you know, the actual diagram looks a little bit more complicated than it did before. So we can see that it goes both ways. And then the issue will be these consuming companies. The only way they can purchase it from the renewable energy utility, or they have to purchase it from the KEPCO. because there will be some lack of energy. They can't get the full amount from the renewable energy utility. So the other way is that they can get it from KEPCO or from the power market. Based on the system itself, there is a system in place of how they can directly get it from the power market, but there hasn't been a single instance when a consumer has purchased power directly from the power market. The reason for that is because they can get, KEPCO can get it at a discounted price, but if you go directly into the power market, then they have to pay the full SMP price. So even if you're purchasing the same amount of electricity, you are paying far more when you make the trade directly with the power market. So the smart way will be to go through the KEPCO. But then from the KEPCO's perspective, as companies use more renewable energy and only supplement the amount that they lack from KEPCO, will not really be good for their business. So they have introduced a new supplementary fare scheme to charge these companies. But of course, they have seen a lot of backfire from the market, so they have not put it into full effect yet. So this means that from the company side of view, if they use more and more renewable energy, it means that they will have to purchase electricity from KEPCO at a more expensive price. And then there is another issue. Let's look at the orange person here, which is the renewable energy operator or utility. And this utility cannot purchase electricity from the actual power market. But this utility or this operator can only purchase this kind of a generator from these generators and not directly from the direct market. So if these kind of utility, if they can have direct access to the power market, then it will be great if they can make up for the shortcomings, but they do not have access to the power market. There were some notifications of the direct PPA, and I know that it was very controversial. So it says that renewable e-generators can sell to Korea Power Exchange or renewable utilities. And it also says that the PPA can have a contract, split contract, and that RPS is available. And the scope of eligible installed capacity was lowered from 1 megawatt to 0.3 megawatt. However, there are some limitations that direct purchase is possible in the power market, but at a higher SMP, and purchase of PPA supplemental power from needs to become from KEPCO. And there is a debate over the high base rate that KEPCO has set forth. So what is the biggest issue? So SMP plus REC, so this is the price. I think REC is around 61. And I think that KEPCO is around 150. That is the base price that they actually sell the electricity for the industry. So if you don't go through KEPCO, you have to pay 280, which is almost double of the price of KEPCO. So this is also a financial burden for the companies. And of course, the actual term of the price that is stipulated into the direct PPA or third PPA is confidential, but I believe that this will be the average cost. And then, of course, there will be some additional costs related to transmission, distribution of the network usage fees, and various additional charges are also a factor that makes it difficult for renewable energy PPAs to expand. And the intermittency of renewable energy generation causes problems of excess or deficient electricity demand at different times of the day. So while this problem can be solved in the case of third-party PPAs by introducing an equal monthly or annual generation settlement, it is difficult to do so for direct PPA. So what happens for holidays, for weekends, where there is a surplus of energy? Then they just have to send it to KEPCO without charging KEPCO. So what is the case for these large generators? So when this is over 100 gigawatt per hour, it is a big company and it needs a large generator. If you look into the green premium, direct PPA, everything needs to be mobilized. However, one other issue that our institution or system has is that it lacks consistency. So third PPA will be KEPCO, and then direct PPA needs to be done by KPX. There are so many different stakeholders for these PPAs. And then the Korea's version of RE100 standards might be different from other foreign countries' RE100. Such discrepancies is causing and generating a lot of confusion. And the biggest issue is that a large company might have several different business entities. And then they need to have different PPAs for different business entities, which means that even if it's a single brand, they have to enter multiple PPAs for KEPCO. This means that even if they want to go RE100, there might be some research centers where they do not meet the actual standard, or they may not have the eligibility to sign a PPA. So within the same company, they would have to enter contract on a business entity basis, which is very complicated. Again, and even with the same companies, maybe A subsidiary has sufficient electricity where B actually lacks energy. And that cannot be coordinated. So that kind of lack of coordination and consistency, it's actually hurting the expansion of PPA. Medium to small size. There will be some leftover renewable energy on the holidays, but they can't actually use it. Again, then they would have no choice but to send it to KEPCO for free. So there is also a problem of excess energy. Let's move on to the recommendation. So this is the biggest one. So the renewable energy middleman, or the broker in the middle, should not only be the channel of where they actually send and purchase the renewable energy, but they also need to have direct access to the power market. By doing so, if there is excess energy, they can sell it to the power market. If there is a lack of or insufficient amount of energy, then they can also purchase it directly from the power market. We also need to think about the measures to improve the electricity market. Diversification will be very important in the electricity market. There needs to be an enhancement of market functionality through the introduction of ancillary services and real-time markets. This will be very important. Also, it needs to be properly incentivized so that ancillary services and diversified products can enter into the power market. And trade needs to be done fairly and openly without any complication. Let's talk about cost. Many complain that purchasing renewable energy in Korea is very costly. Some degree can be understood because Korea does not have massive land space. So in order to generate renewable energy, some part of the land we would have to take from its original purpose. So all of that can add up to the high cost. And since there are no REC incentives for power generators for PPA, there needs to be incentives to lower the investment cost. And Korea has very low incentives compared to major foreign countries. As you can see, many other companies has lowered. Sorry, I'm just having trouble with my clicker. So in other countries, it has lowered the burden of RE100 transition costs, with PPA electricity prices at about the same level as the grid. And investment tax credits should be granted to renewable energy generation projects for PPA to stimulate investment and lower generation costs. So again, there can be many incentives to lower the cost, for example, a tax incentive, as mentioned.
그다음에 그 여러 가지 이제 RPS 비용 RPS 우리가 전략상 이후부터 재정 의무 비율을 제도해서 지원해주는 주지 참여하는 RC
and providing incentives for resident participation in renewable energy sources for PPAs. Providing the additional REC weighted values for renewable energy sources for RPS allows residents to share the revenue and also induce power generators to do so. There are no incentives up to now offered to renewable energy sources for PPAs, so the inducement to participate is lower than for RPS. And financial burden is also a big issue. So financial burden mitigation measures should be introduced. A variety of financial institutions, including insurance books, and it will also incentivize the domestic renewable EPFs for participation. The high rate of return requirements of investment firms are also reducing the economics of businesses due to increased financial cost. And currently, I think that 90% of the total cost can be covered by project financing. I know that it will be further lowered to 80%. But we will need the right system to do so. I'm sorry, I have too much here prepared, and I know that I'm being very quick in moving through my presentation. But in summary, that we need to change the cost structure and make sure that the purchasing of renewable energy can be done in an inexpensive and more convenient way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. Please give him a big round of applause. Now we will invite those two speakers onto the stage for the Q&A session, and we will be just taking 3 or 4 questions due to time constraint. First, we have the first presenter, Eunbyul Jo of SFOC. Please come onto the stage. Yes, I'm back here. Any questions, please?
네, 질문이 있으신 분.
Anyone with a question, please raise your hand so that we can pass you the microphone.
네, 안녕하세요.
Hello. I am Kyung-sik Kim from the Scrap Research Institute. Thank you for your presentation. Actually, I learned a lot. Well, I have a little bit of information about this topic, but I think that the general public doesn't have a lot of information, and people in this working in this area, it doesn't encourage them that much, and that's why the policymakers are not putting a lot of efforts in this regard. And Professor Kang, and your presentation, you all focused on the supply side. However, I think the key is to facilitate demand. Demand should be mandated to lead to supply, and that in turn should lead to adjustment in the supply policy. I think that is the general issue that is being neglected by the policymakers in Korea. Demand should be there, And also, maybe at the beginning, the government should be supporting the supply. But with the market role, I think that the supply can be facilitated. I think that your future research can focus more on that topic. And last week, when I saw the economic commentary, well, I believe that eradicating the S&P is the key. And the retail market and the wholesale market, if they are connected, the side effects of S&P could be minimized. But if, like in Korea, the retail price is regulated while wholesale is not, if we have that kind of policy, I think that is insane. So first thing we need to do from the public and the private sector is to start a campaign to remove S&P. Well, I think it was more of a comment than a question. So I know that you said that we need to put more emphasis on supply and on demand, and I agree with that. I focused my presentation on permitting and siting. However, it will naturally follow if we have sizable demand. And if there is a lot of demand, the regulation will naturally be relaxed. Then what do we need to have in order to facilitate demand? Well, it comes back to the same discussion. It's like egg or chicken question. To have more demand, of course, we need to have lower price. So I think that those two issues are intertwined. And of course, as you mentioned, demand is something that we need to be paying closer attention, especially for initiatives like RE100 can take some leadership in that regard. Well, I can close my answer here. And just to add on this regarding your second comment, the power market has to have like eased regulation, and the utilities and consumers should be more directly connected. I surely agree with that point. And for that, I think different sectors should be working together as well.
답변 감사합니다. 혹시 또
Thank you for your answer. Any other questions?
있으신 분은 손을 들어주시길 바랍니다. 네, 없으시면 네, 조은별 연구원님.
Well, if not, thank you, Ms. Cho.
다음으로 두 번째 연사이신 강승진 교수님을 무대 위로 모시겠습니다.
Next, I would like to invite Professor Kang back to the stage. If you have any questions for Professor Kang, please raise your hand and we'll pass the mic to you. I just want to add one more comment about the earlier question. I think rather than the S&P itself, I think the CBP market right now, the electricity market, that was actually formed in 2001, and it has been now 20 years. Many things has changed around the electricity market and the electricity structure. However, the market has not changed at all. It is like an old dinosaur. I think that is where the problem lies. In the RE100 era, in the green era, and I think we need to keep abreast with the global trend, and that the market itself needs to be transformed. But once it was introduced, it is still there for 20 years, and I do know that we are the only country that has this kind of a power market structure. I do hope that we can see some improvement very soon. And the other is that the S&P is like 200 or 250, but like KEPCO, there is no change. It is like 100 or 150. So this kind of, again, the price discrepancy is causing a lot of confusion and inconvenience for many of the companies and the market as a whole. And it is actually a hindrance in expanding the renewable energy and to further improve the electricity system. I do want to emphasize one more time that this is a very urgent issue, and a reform needs to happen very quickly. So that was my comment. Any questions from the audience? Just ask me anything. I'm Pyongjin Nam from KPX. I don't think this might be a question that you are able to answer, but in your presentation, you talked about RE100, if the new generators are going to provide energy, then you hope that REC can also work as an incentive. But if we're giving REC incentive, I believe that that might kind of dilute as being RE100 compliant. Well, I wasn't saying that REC should be recognized as an incentive, but whatever there is a energy that they sold to KEPCO, then they will get S&P plus REC. But if there's a third-party PPA, then that is actually excluded from the REC. So then the renewable energy generator needs to shift that to the consumer. So the price will be shifted to the consumer so that they can actually break even. But if you look at the actual contract, then I don't think there is an actually recognition about the RNC. So I'm not saying that let's give incentives. I'm just saying that let's maybe look into some different or indirect policies so that the overall cost can be lowered. I talked about the investment incentives and also the tax incentive. I think that's also an indirect way of lowering the cost. And I haven't had a chance to go through in detail in my presentation, but there are examples that you can see from the US as well. So I was talking more in that kind of a sense, like tax benefit and also the investment tax credit. Like if you look in the US, they have like PTC, production tax credit, and investment tax credit programs for renewable energy. Because the current cost lies at around 61 per kilowatt. So just kind of for giving that cost and just giving it to KEPCO will not make any sense. So I was just saying that temporarily might make sense to have some kind of an incentive program. So the ultimate goal would be having the grid parity, reaching grid parity. And to do that, I hope that the government come up with some indirect system or policies. Thank you. I'm Yum Kyung-won from GM. You mentioned about grid parity. From a demand side, from a consumer side, I know that RE is expensive. So do you would you recommend us wait until the RE energy reaches grid parity? Well, I think given the current condition, I don't think that we will be able to reach grid parity by 2030 for like solar and wind power. There were various factors, but there was also land issue due to the siting regulations, and there's also a permission and licensing issue. So there are so many obstacles for Korea to reach grid parity for our renewable energies. And that is why I'm saying that let's accelerate that path by introducing different kind of measures. For solar panel, I think there was some subsidy of like giving 50% of the installation cost, but after then REC, there is no incentive, no subsidy to the generators whatsoever. That is where I'm coming from. So that let's come up with some kind of guidance. So if there are some PPAs they cannot receive the REC, maybe they can find some indirect way of incentivizing them. So that was really what I was recommending. And also kind of opening the door so that they can trade freely with the power market. GM and I think other companies who are really interested in purchasing the RE100, we're kind of really focused on PPA. Yes, I was focused on PPA. But if that's what you're saying, then for a large consumers, without PPA, there's no way for us to meet the actual energy consumption. So that's why I'm asking about the grid parity, because many of the experts keep saying 2030, by 2030, Korea will reach grid parity. And in your perspective, you thought that that was kind of, too optimistic and that it's kind of uncertain. I know there are other, experts here. So what kind of What kind of recommendations would you make? So if we achieve grid parity, and in order to reach grid parity, I'm saying that we need to introduce many policies, institutions, and schemes. There have been many researches, but none have been actually implemented. Please use the microphone, please.
아이게 목표는 2030년 아이게 차량이 2030년까지 저거 40%, 40%까지 해야 되는데 그게 당 설정이냐? 그 하기가 물량도 없고.
So we don't have first the quantity to do that, and second, it is very costly. So from a demand side, I know that this is very unfortunate, but again, the government needs to kind of step in with measures. So that we can accelerate the grid parity. Like the one-stop legislation for those wind power. As I mentioned, of the 70 permits that are out there, only 4 generators are up and running at this point. So why is that? I think everything is linked together. They receive their permit, but they don't have the right support to actually have their business up and running. They're not breaking even. They're not making any money. So even if it's time consuming, we hope that we can come up with some kind of systematic measure to expand renewable energy. There were so many discussions, but I would have to say the pace is very slow. And that is why today's event is very important and very timely. Yes. Thank you for your comment. I know that there were many questions, but again, due to time constraint, I have a few questions. You talked about that energy transition, for that to happen in an orderly manner, that the plant side or the supply side is important, but it is more important to kind of focus on the demand side. And from that perspective, I think grid parity is very important. So to reach grid parity, I know that, Professor, you have talked about providing subsidies or providing other indirect kind of measures and support to do that. In the European region, I know that there's been a big reform happening in the power market because it has reached grid parity. And many of the RE generators have actually earned a lot of money. And now I think they're in the verge of actually splitting the renewable energy from the power market. So having said that, I think there are 2 ways to reach grid parity. One is by providing subsidy, and second is having other power sources like thermal or nuclear power plant. I know that they're also getting some subsidy. So kind of getting rid of those subsidy might be another way of doing that. Because I know that there are many ancillary systems supporting mechanisms that are supporting the thermal and nuclear power plant. Another point that I wanted to raise is that you mentioned that for direct PPA, the actual operator needs to have direct access to the power market so that when there is a shortage or excess, they can actually do the trade itself. But under the Electric Business Act, that is not allowed. So for the actual utility or the operator to directly trade energy through the power market means it's kind of dismantling the KEPCO's monopolistic status in the market. Is that what you are referring to? Yes, thank you for that. I would have to do some more research of what this means under the law and how it will actually infringe upon the KEPCO's very monopolistic position in the market. I know I've been talking about some incentives and subsidies, but this will be temporary. So it's a support mechanism that will allow for us to reach grid parity in a faster pace. And it will also be a means to actually lower the cost for the renewable energy, make it be competitive as the other conventional energy sources. For the KEPCO's monopolistic, I've had it in my presentation. I thought it was a little too much. I've actually really got rid of it. So this is a very sensitive issue, so I didn't include it, but we have a free market. But among these free trading market, I think Korea is the only country that has a one market dominant party that is kind of having this monopolistic position for power. And I think that is a big hindrance for us, and that is a big obstacle for us to, reaching RE100. That is why I would like to once again urge that we need to really reform our power market. Thank you so much, Professor Gang. Due to the time constraint, we would have to end the Q&A session here. Thank you, Professor Gang, once again. Next, for renewable energy supply and expansion, we'll move on to the panel discussion. We have some technical issues at the moment. We're not having the screen up. Oh, I can see the screen has been turned on again. Then without further ado, I would like to invite all the panelists up onto the stage. Please welcome them with a big round of applause.
네, 기다려주셔서 감사합니다.
Thank you for waiting. And we will now invite our panelists onto the stage.
네, 그럼 패널 토론에
Now, let me introduce today's panel discussants. As moderator, we have the Deputy Director of E2 News, Sang-bok Lee. And as panelists, we have An Byung-jin from KPX. And we have from Korea Energy Agency, Mr. Park Kang-hoon. From Korchum, we have Mr. Choi Kyu-jong. And from Hyundai Wia, we have Seyoon Chung. And from BLK Law Firm, we have Mr. Park Jin-pyo. And from 60 Hertz CEO, Kim Jong-kyu is here with us. Please give them another big round of applause. And now I will toss the microphone to the moderator. Hi, I'm Sang-bok Lee from E2 News to moderate the session. Actually, I wanted to moderate a session that is like being in the limelight, but however, it's like getting our homework being checked by a teacher today. So my hearts are very heavy. Actually, in a different venue, right this time, we have the large companies and the government agencies discussing about CF. RE100 is like the voluntary leadership of companies, and the CF100 utilizing nuclear energy and all the others, whether they would be meaningful is a question. Anyways, we are having like 30 minutes delay based on the previous schedule. So to each panelist, we will give 7 to 8 minutes. Let me introduce our panelists. From KPX, we have An Byung-jin, who is in charge of the new power industry, and he was in charge of the department at KPX when we were first introducing RE100. And from Korea Energy Agency, we have Mr. Kang-hoon Park, who is also in charge of RE100. And from Korchum, we have Kyu-jong Choi. And from the business sector, we have Jung Se-yoon, who is from Hyundai Wia, and the CEO of 60 Hertz, Jong-kyu Kim. And from the legal side, we have lawyer Park Jin-pyo. First, we will hear from government agencies, the KPX and Korea Energy Agency. So, Mr. An, you were involved in the initial stage of designing this initiative, and there were many questions related to the grid connectivity and independence and the fair playground for renewable energies compared to fossil fuel. That kind of fair and transparent market creation was also included in the policy message. Can you comment on this? Hello, I am An Byung-jin from KPX. RE100, actually many foreign countries have discussed about this from long ago, but from our side, we started to feel the necessity for this RE100 discussion from the early 2019. So in the end, the use of renewable energy is one of the ways to achieve the carbon neutrality, and renewable energy is more expensive than fossil fuel, and whether consumers would be willing to use that expensive renewable energy was the key. So with REC, even if we include the solar power, the price per unit is like 200 won. So that is like too much burden for consumers. And as a working level person, what I thought was that at that 201 price, I thought that rather than reducing the price by providing incentives, I thought that the better way or a way to reduce the cost is to institutionalize other options, and there is like other options like greenwashing and etc. But we focused more on direct PPA. Direct PPA is more like creating a seller. So in the past we had KEPCO doing everything at the center. It was very hard to decentralize that, but the president back then had a positive view about this direct PPA. And there were some progress on this. So I think one of the great factor that contributed to this was the direct PPA, allowing consumers to have direct trading. And the presenter talked about the third-party PPA, direct PPA, all those diverse systems allowing the direct trading between parties in the market. Well, we are making that kind of a suggestion to the government. And for the third-party PPA, selling power to consumers and the remaining power to be sold, actually they're just being sold to KEPCO, but that will be changed so that they can make choice whether to sell it to the power market or KEPCO. With direct PPA, based on our analysis, there is the REC and direct PPA and various systems. And if companies have to do RE100, we believe that direct PPA is designed to be the cheapest option. And to give you more benefit, we will do our best. And we just discussed about the Korean RE100 localized policy messages. And the number one message was about the fair playground for renewable energy, just like for a fossil fuel. We were not like hindering that fair playground, but it was just that there were some improvements needed for renewable, like the power generation from renewable was limited, and there were other restrictions. And to overcome those restrictions, or to make the condition better for renewable energy, we introduced various measures, including the REC and the auction exemption and various other initiatives. However, renewable energy couldn't go into CP or other grid market, but in the future, we will provide the same condition to renewable energy. So since 2021, for renewable energy, there is the forecast system. So the renewable operators, they can make the forecast for their expected capacity, and for that, we will provide some kind of financial incentives to help them with the supply. And when renewable energies also participate in the market through the same auction, maybe not the same auction, but still somewhat similar auction system as the fossil fuel. And as for the subsidy system, we have expanded the market from like 40 billion won size to the trillion won size. So I think that can help with the fair playground for renewables. What I want to say to you today is about the demand for renewables. RE100, it was created not because renewable energy was cheap, but rather because it was expensive. And so far, we were just looking into renewables as an obligation that we should be imposing to operators or generators, that like certain percentage of your supply should be from renewables. That was the past system. But now we are having this kind of initiative or campaign that is more focused on facilitating demand side, the consumer side. So if renewables were cheap, there is no need for us to have discussion. Well, for companies, renewable energy could be expensive, but with the mindset of like contributing to the society and taking the leadership here, I believe that renewables eventually reach the grid parity and have the same price as fossil fuel. So it could be regarded as making an investment. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
예. 유기농
Yes, I think the same analogy can be for like organic food. If it's organic, even if it's expensive, it's good for you, so we still purchase it. Renewable energy is like organic produce. So thank you for your comment. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Kang-hoon Park from the Korea Energy Agency. I know that KEA is also in charge of like green premium and PPA. Yes, that is right. We are kind of like supervising the whole RE100. As introduced, I'm Kang-hoon Park. So the green premium, the third party PPA and the direct PPA, and also the system to give confirmations about the renewable energy. We are actually in charge of that, and I do pride in saying that we do have a lot of the systems ready and up and running. However, in terms of the effectiveness and efficiency, there might be still an issue. I think the overall capacity was around 26 terawatt, and I think at the first half of last year was 52 terawatt. And we believe that this year there will be about 8 to 10 terawatts of green premium bidding. And REC is also increasing. So it started from 5 giga last year, 64. And already up to now, this year, we have around 330 gigawatts. Many of the companies are targeting for 2040 and 2050, and the electricity price will go up. There is definitely a tendency to do that. Considering all of the above, in order to achieve the government's goal and to have more company participate in the RE100, then I think that the supply will increase naturally. But as of now, I am quite confident that the actual supply is sufficient to meet the needs of the companies. And for other kind of implementation tools like PPA or systems, if those are also accompanied, then maybe more will join, and maybe we'll come to a point where the actual supply is insufficient. As others, the presenters and panelists have mentioned, I think the big issue is that even the company wants to actually have the renewable energy. There is also the residents' acceptance. There is also the siting issue and not having the enough space for the installation. Those are some of the physical challenges, and I think the government is very well aware of the challenges that we have. Many other agencies, related parties are making recommendations, so it's not that we don't recognize the issue. For PPA, I think compared to RPS, there is a project financing challenge. And for siting regulation, I know that the government are trying to deregulate as much as it sees fit. And as Professor Kang mentioned, that REC is really an incentive, and I don't believe that a direct incentive or direct subsidy will make any sense right now. But if there are some indirect ways to lower the cost of renewable energy, then that can be an option that we can explore. And this year, we hope to have the REC used for renewable energy, about 95% of that. We also have 50 billion as the government subsidy, and that will be used as a form of project financing for renewable energies. There are other guarantee products. We're also working with other insurance companies or reinsurance companies and guaranteeing companies. And mid to long-term bidding or bidding per energy source, there are other options that we are also considering. So in the near future, I believe that many of these will be implemented and will be open to many of your suggestions. In summary, I would like to recap and say that I really agree and I'm on board with the RE100, and that needs to be recognized by many of the people and the general public. I do believe that there needs to be some reforms to make sure that this happens fast. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Park. Whether it's Korea Energy Agency or KPX, I know that many people are under a governmental audit to kind of see like all the conducts and all the activities that those have done following the previous administration. I think that we will be getting a conclusion very soon. You are kind of like a quasi-government agency, so I know that there is kind of a different temperature going on between what you think and what the companies are feeling. You mentioned that RE100, you're on board with it, and it's a voluntary effort to go 100% renewable energy. You might call it voluntary. I don't know if the company side will completely agree, because I believe that it is kind of becoming a prerequisite for companies, and it's an option that they have to choose. I would now like to turn to Mr. Kyujong Choi from Koram. I know that there was a big discussion related to this, so if you can just shed light on that. Thank you. So I'm the director of the Green Energy Support Center, and related to this, we're providing some consultancy to small and medium enterprises who are looking ways to introduce green energies. We have several projects. We're looking for opportunity to really scale up and involve more participants. I'll talk about some of the work that we have done and some of the plans that we have in the future. Again, RE100 is no longer an option. It is a must. We have many of the big companies that are exporting overseas. We are becoming a global company. So RE100 is no longer something that you can choose not to do. So what are they wanting? What are the RE100 companies really wanting in Korea? They want a long, stable supply, inexpensive renewable energy. Is it possible realistically? No, it is not. If you look into the power market, it is really the KEPCO that used to be this big giant, but now it's kind of a giant that doesn't have the energy that it used to. It's kind of losing its life right now. So that is also kind of becoming a hindrance in the overall power market. So there are so many factors that are working against this kind of a company's wish. believe that we need to expand the actual source of energy. I know earlier there was some discussion about the demand side, but the generator's role is important, but added to that, the demand side should not just be a simple recipient of the energy, but they need to do their homework, trying to find a better energy source, trying to find a more smarter way to procure energy. I think when the two is actually met together is when the synergy happens and the government can accelerate the permit and licensing, and it will also facilitate investment, and it will also make the government understand that there is an incentive to invest in those areas. Second, I think in terms of Korea, renewable energy source is not easy to find. Therefore, we need to be smart and effective of utilizing these sources. I think Professor Kang mentioned about free trade, and I think that is also partly involved in what I'm trying to say, that there needs to be more diverse source of energies. If a company wants to purchase an REC, and if it has a certain room, if they have room to actually spare the energy, then it will make more sense for the companies who is looking for the energy to purchase that in the power market. And to have a smooth transaction between the generators, I think that also needs to be ensured. And next, not only the expansion or supply will be important in the renewable energy part, I think it can also be sought for in terms of the job creation.
지금 그 재생에너지 사업하면서
And as you are involved in the renewable energy business, not only look into the electricity production, but I think an approach from a more broader point of view, looking at the national industry's competitive point of view, will be also important. The biggest problem related to PPA will be the base cost for the KEPCO. And already the electricity cost for general use is expensive than that for the industrial use. So I don't think that more burden should be levied onto the consumers. Last month, we conducted a survey for 320 companies, and 23.8% said that they have been negatively affected, and other 30% said that they have been fairly affected by this. So by this power is very a vital part of business, and many people are saying that because of the fluctuations of this kind of electricity is leading to biggest problems, and some have resulted in terminating the PPA agreement, some have led to pending decisions of how to use and procure the energy. If there is a cost burden and also uncertainty because the PPA is quite fairly new to Korea, I believe that not many companies will be voluntarily wanting to enter a PPA. Looking into the hourly rate, looking into their actually consumption amount, this will not really make sense. And that will also kind of hurt their competitiveness as an exporters. Therefore, reviewing this matter will be important. And for KEPCO, their role in the renewable energy, what they're getting from KEPCO is the main source of the energy, but calling that the supplementary source of energy and applying a different cost scheme or price scheme for that does not make sense. So I believe there needs to be some reasonable threshold saying that it will be supplementary energy if it's not more than 50%.
인간 기업들이 상위에 어떤 도움을 얻어들거나
If there's some request, how are those requests or suggestions received? Yes, we do have a hotline call center, and all the consultancies have been prepared for since January. And what we felt is companies and generators find it quite challenging to talk directly to any of the public side. But again, we hope that we can be the liaison to the government. We can be the bridge. So we will take interest. So please feel free to contact us if you need to consult with somebody or if you have any questions. The consultancy service is not fully up and running, but I think that from early April, we will be sharing our contact points so that for those who are interested, can come and join us. Thank you.
I know that this is like a temporary organization, but I hope that it can now later evolve into a permanent organization so that policy proposals or recommendations can be submitted whenever needed. From businesses, well, we have Hyundai Wia representing the business side. Hyundai Wia, are you a RE100 supplier or demand side? Well, I am Jung Se-yoon from Hyundai Wia. And last year we have declared our commitment to RE100 by 2035. And to do that, we are performing various measures, including the green premium and REC and etc. We use a lot of power, so we are trying to secure a lot of capacity through PPA. And with the PPA fee becoming an issue internally, we are discussing whether this PPA agreement is the right choice. From the policy side, what we want is, as others have already mentioned, some kind of indirect support from the government side to facilitate the renewable energy market. To lower the renewable energy price is one of our aspiration. If that happens, it can really help us achieve RE100. Well, so in Korea, there are 29 members to RE100, and you are one of them. Yes, by 2045, you are going to achieve RE100. And especially that is from the refrigerator and coolant, right? No, we also have engine and metal joints components for cars are being manufactured by Hyundai Wia. So you thought that you want to sign on to RE100 voluntarily, or because your customers wanted you to sign on to it? Well, the biggest factor was the request from global customers, and also Hyundai, our mother company, declared RE100, so we are like one of their subsidiaries. That's why we had to also sign on. So from the demand side, you heard about the policy proposals and targets. Can you comment on them? Well, I think that so far there were no venues to make proposals from our side. It was like the government setting the policy and we just had to follow them. And today's venue really allowed us to have open discussion about how the policy can be adjusted or modified to accommodate the reality of the industry and the market. And I hope that we can continuously raise our voice regarding the future policy. Thank you for creating such a venue for us today. Any other recommendations or messages that you want to tell us today? No? The next panelist is from, well, how should I be introducing him? Well, it's like a fintech company. Your company is like a fintech company, green energy fintech company, Mr. Kim? Yes. I will briefly introduce our company. We are mostly involved in the bottlenecks, especially the financial funding part of creating the renewable energy. And so far, we have been providing advice to about 9.2 gigawatts of renewable energy. And we also had the equity investment in those projects. And now about 6 gigawatts of renewable energy, this development is being carried out. So we are mostly focused on the financing for the renewable energy. Recently, we are expanding our projects in RE100. And our customers, well, many of them are from abroad, like the US and Europe. And they have operation in Korea, or sometimes Korean companies have operation in overseas in those cases. To actually, in this area, we have a lot of information gap. And to resolve that, we are helping these companies achieve RE100 by creating equal access to information. And in that regard, we thought that there are like 3 areas where we can have policy improvements. And one thing that we want to propose to companies. First, regarding the policy in implementing RE100 and the RPS system, they are somehow in competition or conflict. So for the power operator, when they have created the renewable energy, rather than selling it to RE100 company, it is more advantageous for them to sell it to the RPS scheme. So unless we eradicate this competition between RE100 and RPS, it's very hard to funnel the power to RE100. For example, offshore wind, we have a lot of weights for RPS. Of course, the capex for offshore wind is very high, and to maintain the economic value, the government is providing the incentive. But on the other hand, RE100, it has only 1.5 points as the weighting for RPS. So for the power generators and operators, there is no motive to sell their power to RE100 companies. So what I think is needed is for RE100 and RPS to have the equal playground, and power utilities with RPS of 1.0 or below should have the incentive to provide their power to RE100 members. And in that regard, for RPS scheme, during the development, they face a lot of complaints, civil complaints. That is why they have the REC incentive scheme. And I think it's the same for RPS operators. But for the operators, they don't have any incentives being provided. That kind of unfair scheme is the reality currently, and it should be modified to facilitate more companies to go into this RE100 and RPS. And we talk about the quantity, the volume of renewable energy, but it seems like we are neglecting the quality. In the US and Europe, they are more focused on quality than quantity. For example, we had Korea Energy Agency mentioning this briefly, like 95% of the RE100 being achieved in Korea is coming from green premium. And as you know, for green premium, there is no additionality. So like purchasing REC or doing other activities, actually there is almost no additionality from green premium. it means that there will be no future changes coming out of this, and the supply is limited and demand goes up, so that's like it making the market even tighter. The long-term solar power cost is 154, but actually in the power market is being traded at like 160. And for REC in the spot market is like in 61, but in the actual power market it's like 70 to 75 won, and for vintage like last year or the previous years, it is like twofold that level, very expensive level. So in the existing power market price and RE100 price have big gaps. That's why we have the quality control issue. So that if possible, I believe that of course we need green premium in Korea, but if there is something like a ceiling for green premium to avoid companies using green premium as an excuse for the transition should be limited. And the third policy proposal is something that Professor Kang has said, something from the financial side. So financially, the off-takers, the demand side, when they purchase it, actually the PF is very tricky. Of course, there are some products being minted there, but it's very limited. One of the biggest issues is the credibility of the off-taker, whether the contract can be maintained for like 20 years. And one of the simplest ways to resolve this could be if that company goes bankrupt or has to reduce the purchase volume, then that volume should be handed over to the previous operator or the mandatory operator or the supplier or the RPS and the other PPA and RPS. If they could be interchangeable, I think that it can resolve the off-taker credibility issue, and all the other financial like funding issues can be resolved to facilitate the funding for those projects. And I said that, well, there was a question from the audience, someone with a leather jacket, whether companies should be just waiting. And we work together with many companies in Europe, like chemical companies and semiconductor companies in Europe. And what they requested us was, well, there is like REC and PPA and the premium system, and that should be like less than 30% of the total capacity, and like 70% should be coming from the maker strategy, coming from the supply side, and they wanted our assistance, like advice and consultation on that. So it means that European companies are not just focusing on purchasing expensive renewable energy, but more on equity investment, setting up the additionality by setting up new facilities. It means that the ROI and the additionality becomes equal or even greater ROI than what they were trying to reap from the project. So as Korea is somehow in the transitional period, I hope that Korean companies can more focus on the maker strategy. I believe that that is the most optimal RE100 strategy that Korean companies can opt to. That is what many European companies are doing. Of course, it's not easy, but I believe that that's better than just sitting back and waiting. Thank you.
네, 윤 대표님 현장에서 느끼셨던 다양한 제안들 감사합니다.
Thank you for the suggestions and the comments of what you felt through today's event. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Jim Pyo Park, partner lawyer at the law firm Bailey & Kim. As I've been listening to the presentation, I don't think it's only a problem of supplying the renewable energy. It's more about the system, and it's more about the structure. It's about the governance. It's about the hierarchical structure, if you will. So how did you find today's presentation? Would you like to add any comments to it? Yes, I agree with you that this is a very complicated issue. It's about the overall governance of the electricity market, and it's kind of all intertwined. So you might know where to start. But having said that, it's also a very simple matter because at the end of the day, the electricity industry itself is distorted and it lags behind. And that is why in other advanced markets, it just comes natural. But for us, we need to forcefully legislate a new law, a new policy. And that's why there are so many requests and that we feel like we have to twist somebody's arm to get one thing done. But if we come back to the basics, if we come back to the starting point and look at the overall market, then it may become a very simple issue. So just wanted to point some of the things. I think today, as I came into this very venue, it was kind of like a really surprising scene for us. I know there are many advisors, there are the consumers and also producers. I actually provide more advice for actually fossil fuels, but I now see that so many younger generations are joining today. So I think that when people think of renewable energy, they're more young, they're more vibrant, and I think that our future is in good hands. Moving on to maybe the wind power. You talked about the permits and licensing. I think for the siting regulation, that is something that already the other advanced countries have been doing. And a few years ago, there was a need to have the right policy and legislation, but it did not pass the bill. And again, it is kind of bundled up with all the other issues as well. There are 3 acts related to this. They are similar and they're also at the same time different. But then if we do have the right law and policies, will it actually promote the wind power project? I also have a question mark on my mind. I do think in the past, the licensing was just given as they were handing out cookies to the project managers. So there were so many plans and there were so many projects about how to build a wind power plant, but some didn't really were valid, some didn't really work. And the other is really about the acceptance. I think for the offshore wind power, we have to think about the people living in the area who are making living out of like catching fishes. So what are we going to do about the compensation? What makes sense for the compensation? For the fishermen and all the fisher folks out there, what compensation makes a sense? And I know that there were some talks within the municipalities, but those were not shared. And even if there is a law that passed and if the permitting and licensing becomes more simplified, there is still a lot of work ahead of us. This means that government really needs to step up because for offshore, there is no right in land. There is not, it is not in contact with any of the law related to the land usage and entitlement. Therefore, if we have the right policies and if we have the right compensation plan, then this might be solved relatively easily. Another is related to the electricity price, having another fair scheme for PPA, and I know that that was quite shocking for many people. Direct PPA, third-party PPA, I also provide advice to my clients, and many are coming to me and asking, should I just terminate my PPA because it's not working for me? In my opinion, I think there are 2 issues with KEPCO. First is the discrimination, and second is a procedural flaw. First, if we look into the procedural issue, as far as I know, they just kind of announced it without any pre-notification, and they kind of sneaked it in with other kind of a bill, and it was just kind of passed. So we have to think about the due process. Was that the right way to actually do it? Because according to the law, whenever a public service utility needs to increase the price, there needs to be a hearing, there needs to be a certain process, it needs to follow through. Something like this is almost impossible to imagine happening in the US because I know that there is a utility council and it's almost kind of like a actual lawsuit. They hear from both parties. But now, again, when it comes to governance and when it comes to these issues, we are quite far behind. And also fossil fuel, the overall system and the compensation and the subsidy, they're not getting the treatment that they used to. So they're also kind of struggling, but at a different issue, but with a different issue. So again, the market itself is again very much distorted. Another thing related to electricity price is that from a consumer's point of view, they kind of worry about PPA becoming too expensive. But from my perspective, I think that is again because now there is a little inflation with the electricity price. If it becomes normal again, and if KEPCO is able to kind of turn around the business, I know that it is in deficit by like 20 trillion won. Can they actually turn black again? Can the government make it better? I don't believe so, because now the economy is not in a good place, and I don't think the government will be funneling money just to kind of put back KEPCO at its normal state again. With all of that, I think the structure just naturally points that the electricity price will be increased even further. So given that, I think now it might be the right time to enter into a PPA. Why do I say this? Because this same issue kind of happened with the gas as well, because the Korea Gas Company is kind of the KEPCO in the gas industry. So they needed to kind of balance the demand and supply. And now the gas price went up. And then they said that, oh, I can't use a gas corporation because it's too expensive. And a lot of the other companies said that I just want to import my gas directly from the overseas. So you don't know what's going to happen. So don't think too much ahead. And I'm sorry, let me go back. I forgot one thing to mention. I mentioned two issues. One was discrimination. I think the frame is kind of wrong, because if they kind of framed it differently and didn't say that it's for like supplementary electricity, because what they're saying is that they want to kind of facilitate the use of renewable energy. If we were to oversimplify it, self-generating solar panel energy, they just self-generate it. It's not PPA, so they can use the electricity at a very lower price. So just because having a PPA, you need to pay more for the same sort of energy, that itself is discrimination. And I know that it also goes against the principle of fair trade. That is why all the participants in RE100 needs to raise their voice, because without the voice, nothing will actually change. Show your desperation, show your opinions, really voice your opinions. And I think you need to really put some pressure on to KEPCO. I know that we're running out of time, so I don't want to be long, but another thing that I realized is that we've met kind of like a VPPA related to the REC, but that didn't really work, because everything again is kind of intertwined. Having a ceiling for SMP, that again is not an issue with the generator. That is also linked with RE100, because the distortion of the market, there is a lot of uncertainty, and with that there is not much incentive to join RE100. Again, for a lot of these kind of systems, electricity systems, we're having issues in Jeju Island, where there also has been an issue that has not been the channel coming back up to the mainland of Korea. So this is something that both the RE generators need to work on. Also, this is something that the policy needs to change, because the current Jeju Islands, the curtailment issue with wind power is a big hurdle. That means that the network is not upgraded. There is a curtailment that they are not actually producing as much energy as they can, which then kind of hinders their profitability. I know there's a lot of an issue. Sorry for being very long, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you. As you know, as you just heard, Mr. Park is great in giving advices. If anybody needs any legal advice or counsel, then please go to Mr. Park. So thank you, our 6 panelists. I know we have many from the media. Let's first take questions from the audience, and then if there are any other questions, then I will take them. For our journalists, if you have any questions, then please raise your hand. We'll hand you the microphone. Please tell your name and your association.
우리 기자들이 질문을 잘 안 하더라고요. 예.
Well, I see the Korean reporters are not very active in asking questions. If you have any questions, something not clear, any suggestions? Maybe I will come back to them later. Well, from online, we have some questions. To Mr. Park. The green premium scheme, it has the risk of greenwashing, and it is not recognized as actual carbon reduction. So I don't think that it's a really practical long-term solution for companies. So green premium doesn't have any additionality. Because there is a lot of green premium volume, it doesn't mean that there is sufficient renewable energy volume remaining. Can you answer on this? Well, I understand that there are debates about green premium. Korea's green premium and foreign countries' green fair scheme, I don't think that they are fundamentally different. It is just about charging or granting the credit based on the green activities of the company and imposing different fees based on that. However, I think that we need to have more accurate understanding about green premium. Additionality, of course, we need to do other activities like constructing a separate renewable energy facilities and etc. So for companies like rather than having green premium, they are preferring to have other activities like PPA. For the REC, I think it's like systematic issue that we have in Korea. We also reckon that issue. And well, regarding your point about green premium, yes, we understand there are some issues. And regarding PPA as well, while implementing this, we are trying to make improvements as we go. We're still new on this, so that's why companies are doing green premium and REC and various other options they can find based on their reality. So we need to supply the right balance, strike the right balance between various options. And in the long term, there are like implementation issues or sustainability issue. And considering that green premium itself is not sufficient, and RPS, whether it can be aligned with RPS, well, that is something that we need to ratify in like a mid to long term. Thank you. Well, I'm not sure whether it answered the question sufficiently. We will now be taking questions from the floor. Any participant here with a question?
뭐 계실 때까지 제가 그러면 안병리를 드리고 싶습니다.
Until we receive questions, I would like to ask a question to Mr. Byung-jae-nan. So with more PPA, from a KPX point of view, you have members and you also receive a membership fee. From that perspective, how can I put it? Is there a view of how you see direct PPA from a Korea Power Exchange point of view? And you're also the director of new businesses, so you need to discover and really foster these new business. So want to know your perspective on this. So we are running the wholesale market in the actual power market. So if you do a direct PPA, then that means that you will not be within the market that we operate. And I think that's also something that the head of our agency is kind of contemplating about. I am a director for this new business. And I really have an interest in the direct PPA. And if you think about it, it's because if you go back to why the Korea Power Exchange was born, is because we wanted to make our power market more advanced and more sophisticated. And that's how it started, so that the generators can freely compete, have a wholesale market, and really give the choice to the consumers of what kind of power that they wanted to consume. However, going after different administrations, the very essence of the power exchange kind of got a little bit misconstrued or distorted to a degree. So the right of choice of consumers, that might, if I talk about that, then they'll say that, oh, like, don't bring that again. We've tried that, it didn't work, it's not going to work this time. And there are some skepticism. However, I do believe that renewable energy will be the main source of energy in a very near future. So from the renewable energies point of view, I think that some of the very old challenges that we had, some of the chronic issues might be resolved. If there are people who wanted to purchase a certain energy, then they can do so. That is why I am really interested in renewable energy and RE100, because I think it also serves our purpose, wanting to diversify the power market. Yes, so thank you for your support related to renewable energy. I would like to ask one more time if there are any questions from the floor.
말씀해 주시고요. 답변자를 지정하셔도.
So please, well, I'm from Incheon Airport. I have a question to Mr. An from KPX. Well, the question is, there could be on-site and off-site PPA to enhance the internal consumption of the renewable energy, and later, if they have sufficient production, do you think that consumers can eventually become prosumers, selling their remaining power in the market? Well, PPA, due to the network usage fee, it has low economicality. And at Incheon Airport, near the airport, we have some vacant land. And if we use that land, I think we can secure sufficient economic value, because those lands are just being not utilized currently. So with the signing on to RE100, with the signing on to RE100, the Incheon Airport Corporation is thinking about using the direct PPA. And of course, our power usage is concentrated during the daytime, and we will of course have some remnant power, but to transmit it to the grid, actually it has low economic value until maybe 2040 and etc. And later we will have the issue of sending back the power. So do you think the question is whether the consumer can play the role of the supplier in the market eventually? Well, if you use the kind of a self-generator, well, at least 50% should be consumed by yourself, and the remaining can be sold in the market. But for solar power, there is no such restriction anymore. And your question is about solar power. So if the aim of that installation is for sale, then it could be prohibited. But if your initial goal is for internal consumption, and of course I believe that you will not be selling over 50%, so I don't think that's an issue. But if you want to construct the solar farm that is exceeding your peak demand, I don't think that is economical, but actually that is feasible if you really want to go into that path.
Hello, I am Cassandra, and I work for the Europe Korean Chamber of Office. I would like to ask questions in English, if that's okay.
So my question is just to clarify that given the changes to the price system by KEPCO recently, to charge higher fares to electricity distributed from KEPCO, if a consumer were provided partial electricity via a direct PPA, could you explain or could you outline in a concise way how this would greatly impact the renewable energy market in Korea? And are there any cases in which foreign countries charge higher fares to the consumer having direct PPA contracts?
우리 통역 좀 해주시죠. 정확하게. 예.
You want me to say again? Sorry.
질문 주신 걸 제가 바로 이해한 게 맞다면 지금 이제 중앙 전력 거래 시장에서 이제 한전에 의해서 주로 기업들이 그동안 전력을 사고 있었습니다. 근데 이제 PPA를 통해서 직접적인 이런 거래가 이제 확대된다면 이제 그 중앙 전력 시장에 이제 미치는 영향에 대해서 좀 질문을 주셨다고 생각이 됩니다. 맞을까요?
네.
답변 주시.
그러면 안병진 차장님이 답변을 해주실까요? 중앙전력 시장에 미치는 영향. 예.
I'm not sure if you're asking from a system operator's point of view or the market's point of view.
사실은 이제
I think in Korea we didn't used to have direct PPA, and it was just kind of introduced, and the size was not big. So currently it won't be much of a problem. But for consumers to enter a direct PPA, it's kind of like having their own like self-generator and being like self-sufficient. So if that is how you're going to set it up, then it won't be a problem. But we are also preparing for a new power market so that the renewable energies, they can receive bids, and then they also need to meet the mandatory quota. And there will be some other additional added services that we will be including into the market. And with those ancillary products, they can also gain profit. So if a consumer enters into a direct PPA, so within those consumers, they need to meet a certain consumption or generation quota. Because if that is not if the power market needs to purchase a certain quota, and if it's like a microgrid, and if they can meet the supply and demand, then that is okay. But if they can't actually produce the much they're using, if there needs to be some excess usage, and if they need to purchase it from the market, and if they want to be a player in the market, then they need to abide to all the standards and the quota we set for the supply and demand side. I hope that answered your question. We have one more online question.
이건 우리 공단에서 좀 답변을 해주셔야.
I think the KEA can answer this. The RPS production capacity, I think that it has like a limited additionality in terms of being like a green premium from OT. With just green premium, saying that we have sufficient renewable energy being generated here would be like a far stretch. Yes, I think it's similar to the previous online question. As already mentioned, in Korea, the procurement market started to go into operation from 2021, and since starting like September, we had the direct PPA. Still, we have many issues like contract issue and system issues and the fare issue. Still, they need to be solved. So in the short term, in procuring renewable energy, we should be utilizing the green premium as an interim solution. Of course, the government is not like we are doing green premium only. As Mr. An said, we have BPA or other proposals being submitted by businesses that are being reviewed by the government. Only with those, the market size for renewable energy in Korea will expand. There are many concerns that we don't have sufficient renewable energy in Korea. That's why we need those interim measures. So in short term, we can cope with a green premium, and in mid to long term, with sufficient revision in laws and institutions, we can have a bigger market being created. So other galvanizing methods and institutions and options being promoted. Until then, we can use green premium as a solution in the short term. Any questions from the media? Can I ask a question? Yes, Mr. Yoon, of course.
Just for your reference, I've majored in transmission lines in my grad school, and one thing that I still don't quite understand is that when you enter into a PPA agreement, if it's on-site, you don't have to pay for the network usage, and if we're off-site, you have to pay for the network usage. So I'm still not clear of why the network usage actually incurs, and I haven't really gotten an answer from KEPCO either. And the reason why I wonder is because when you are trying to be a developer and generate these energy, there are many of the investment that goes into the actual transmission and distribution line, and that will be done in consultation with the KEPCO. So the project managers will be kind of designing it, and then KEPCO will be installing the line for them. And then everything that's generated will first go into KEPCO. And if you're saying that you're going to go do a offsite PPA, then conceptually means that A and B, it's kind of like sending money. It's kind of like a remittance. So there's money deposited in the bank, and then making the transfer from A to B. Then it's just a number that changes. If I send $100, then I will be minus 100. That will be plus 100. It's not the physical money that is actually being transferred. And it's the same for the transmission. There is KEPCO, which is like the bank, and it looks like there's some kind of an actual movement according to the contract, but it actually is not. So I do believe, I understand why the network usage can be quite of a burden, but I don't know why it's a burden, and I don't know why it's actually being charged. So I wanted to ask if anyone knows the answer to that. I hope if KEPCO was here, I know that somebody used to work for KEPCO. Could I just kind of put you there on the spotlight, or? Yes, Mr. Park. So network is more of a infrastructure cost. As you mentioned, electricity, that exact electricity is not purely just sent to that consumer. It's just flowing and traveling around the grid. So it's kind of like a cost sharing of the network because it needs to be paid by somebody. And without the network, you can't actually transfer anything. So it's really the cost for the infrastructure. And the issue we have with this system is that in the past, if we look into the grid system, there was like LNG, coal, and thermal power plant. It was very stable, and it was built on the premise that it will be stable. So there might be some hiccups here and there, but there will not be a big risk. However, now, based on the energy system, there will be a lot of fluctuality. There will be a lot of volatility. And because of that, there might be a need to install more network, more transmission lines and distribution lines. And that might also increase the network usage fee. If we look at other foreign country examples, they have a LMP, which is local marginal price. So they have a differentiated price for the wholesale cost and also a differentiated cost for the network as well. And there is a different structure of the network usage fee. You can say that I'm going to be a firm user, I'm going to be using it on an ongoing basis, or you can also become an intermittent user. So it makes sense that you need to bear the network usage fee. Please raise your hand and wait till you have the microphone.
Yes, I am from KEPCO. I'm in charge of this grid operation. Some of you had questions about the network usage fee, and as you said, it's more like bank transfer. And why is it needed? Why the usage fee is being imposed? And let me explain. So conceptually, this PPA contract, when it's signed from the power source, the generated volume being bought, that is like the conceptual agreement. So from the solar PV, if there is the contract being signed, then that volume generated from that solar farm is not being consumed by that exact company. So it means that the power operator could be in Gyeongnam, whereas the user could be in Seoul. So that's why all the generation comes into the KEPCO grid, and the users, the companies, even if they want to use renewable energy, they have a PPA, but actually they are not using the power generated from that specific operator, but actually all the power generated from renewable energy operators are being mixed into our grid. So that's why we have the network usage fee. However, as the lawyer has said, for the fare for the users of the grid, the level of the fare, any discrimination against certain users, that should be reconsidered. However, it's true that they are using the grid, and that's why we should not be questioning whether it's legitimate to impose that usage fee. So I hope that there is no misunderstanding. And also, I felt a little uncomfortable while listening to some comments. It's like we are like the public enemy or something. Well, from business side, you might feel that way. Well, if that's the case, it's like we are not doing things right. But I really wanted to say one thing. In Korea, there are many policy proposals being made, But this RE100, especially regarding PPA, it is not being facilitated enough because power being supplied in Korea is so cheap. And why is it so cheap? That is because KEPCO is shouldering all the deficit coming out of this. And actually, KEPCO is not like generating a lot of profit by selling power. We're trying to provide comfort of using electricity to the citizens. Well, we think we can wrap up here. So this distorted power market, how we can normalize it, is something that we need to consider as well in the future. So KEPCO is not trying to charge more for electricity. However, this distorted market should not be like an obstacle to RE100 or anything else. Raising the power fare, well, I know that there are users and suppliers here, but we know that the current level is not sustainable. And as for Samsung Electronics, if they were paying the right fair fee, they would not be still in business. It's like the government supporting them to stay in the business. So if we can raise the fee and have like less distortion in the market, I think that could be the desirable direction, but it takes more time. Well, I think I failed in maintaining that time, but we will have a separate networking session after this. So you can have discussion there. And we have some questions, online questions from abroad.
Why is network fund cannot cover by other funds like ETS? I would like to ask. So why is the grid power can't be covered by ETS? I know that we just heard from KEPCO and you're getting the cost for climate. Would you like to take that question, although you're not a panelist? Okay, so we'll cover this question later on because we are far behind our schedule. With that, I would like to end the panel discussions and we'll move on to the networking. I think now because of the heated discussion that we're having, it kind of shows that we didn't have that much time or opportunity to gather all the stakeholders to hear about some of the opportunities and pain points. Company, they are just more than the consumer of electricity or the producer of electricity. They do a lot of activities. They represent a brand. They need to sell products. So sometimes that also makes them a little reluctant to speak up and really tell us about their opinions. But I hope that we can have more opportunities to hear from them. So as an ending, my first and second daughter loves K-pop. And she follows all the choreography and the dances that she sees on TV. I'm very proud about the so-called K-wave, and now K is like attached to everything Korean, like K-pop, K-music, K-food. And one of the reasons why K-pop is just so successful is not just because we make great music or we have a lot of, talented people, but that is also because we have the best IT technology from, toddlers to senior citizens. All of them are using those very high-tech smartphones with 5G technology. And I think that also did contribute to the actual spread and penetration of Korean culture. I think same can be said for renewable energy. We are not the most latecomer because we first looked into how we can actually utilize, different sources. We came up with the different legislations and bills and proposals of how we can use different energy sources and become more green. That was further supported by the Lee Myung-bak administration, and then in the previous Moon Jae-in administration, he really drove on the green energy, and there were a lot of initiatives. There were a lot of big frameworks coming out. But now, as we actually opened up the Pandora box, we now realize that we were just pretending to do our homework and not much has actually been done. And now that is why we need to do certain things with much haste. There's a saying that I really love. If you don't change yourself, then you can only be impacted by external change. That is a saying that I really like. So I hope that one day we can say K renewable energy or the K standard for green energy. I hope that that K comes sooner than later. Thank you so much to all our panelists, and thank you all for asking your questions. With that, I would like to end this session, and then I think we will have a closing remark. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. We will close the panel discussion here. I want to thank all the panelists for their input.
저희 지금 행사가 끝난 건 아니고요. 마지막 클로징 리마크.
We have one last closing remark. Please stay in your seat. We will wait for 5 minutes and then have the closing remark.
마지막 발언이
We now have the closing remark. After we prepare the stage to close the session, we have Kahi-han from SFOC to close today's session. Thank you all for coming to today's event. Thank you for making the event rich and fruitful, especially to speakers and panelists. From business side, they have issues and questions. Well, we had very complicated discussion. I'm worried that we might have complicated the confusion. But I just want to ask you to bear one thing in mind. After the presentation, or maybe at the end of all the presentations, we had one key question being raised. So what should businesses be doing? Should we just wait until we reach the grid parity? I think that's the core of today's issue, maybe something that we all have in common. And I think the answer to that is this policy message. An event like this can raise the question or raise our voice to MOTI. This policy message, we of course had many recommendations or proposals, and I believe that through our discussion, we had reached this policy message through discussion with the government side and business side. And one thing was about reforming the permit regulation and regulation scheme and price scheme and etc. All the discussions of today will be passed to the MOTI, and I hope that the business people here can continuously get involved in trilateral or bilateral discussions. We will of course have great parity. We do not know when, but your efforts will accelerate it, and also businesses can find a way to secure renewable energy by adding the additionality to the grid. We are planning to have more of these events in the future. I want to ask for your continued interest. Thank you. Thank you, Kahi-han, for your comment. And to close, we have Oliver Wilson from Climate Group, RE100 co-lead, to give his final comment. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you. And this will be my final time popping up on stage today. Thank you very much for everyone's participation in the event today. I think we've really shown what the power of connection of bringing people together, whether that's businesses, NGOs, policymakers, and that can only happen at an event like this. Just before I wrap up today's session, just to make a small plug for another event that the Climate Group has over this part of the world, is in June, we are hosting our first ever event dedicated to Asia. It's the Asia Action Summit. And it will focus on bringing together, similar to this, decision makers and business leaders from energy, steel sectors, and it's about accelerating Asia's role as an economic green powerhouse. And this event will be in Singapore on the 8th of June. If you want to find out more, please come and speak to myself or my colleague, Serena, and we can provide you more information. Back to today's event. It has been a fantastic event, and just to sort of summarize a couple of the key messages, I think Gahi did a really good job, so just to elaborate on some of that. We've heard about the importance of setting an ambitious and strong renewables target, and the urgent need to increase the supply of renewables in South Korea. This is really holding back South Korean businesses, so this needs to be an urgent priority. We've also heard from Professor Sung-Jin Khan on ways that we can expand PPAs and the issues that are faced with high prices at the moment, and that to increase the mechanisms to support renewable electricity. I think the panel discussion was fantastic. There was a lot of depth in that conversation, and it really highlighted the direction needed of future energy policy, and that it needs to move quickly to adjust to the rapidly increasing demand of RE100 companies for renewable electricity now. It was also mentioned a lot on affordability of renewable electricity, and I just wanted to make a brief comment on this. And yes, there are affordability issues in South Korea of renewable electricity, but for an advanced economy, this is more of an exception compared to the rest of the world. Many advanced economies are seeing the price of renewables plummet and being a lot cheaper than fossil fuels, and in many cases, that's a factor of 2, 3, 4 times cheaper than fossil fuels. So it's possible, and it'd be great to see these benefits realized in South Korea too. Going forward, how do we take forward these policy messages that have been developed? Well, we will be continuing to work with our RE100 members and also the South Korean government and associated agencies to ensure that these policy messages are realized. I just want to thank our members. Many of you are present in the room today for your continued support in our policy work with the South Korean government, and of course there'll be further opportunities for us to engage with you on that moving forward. Following today's event, we will be taking the outcomes of this to MOTI and ensuring that what has been shared today is raised with them too. But obviously the key point of today's event was to launch these RE100 South Korea localized policy messages. And they really are an urgent issue that highlights that reform is needed now. This isn't just a nice to have, this is essential. These policy messages are important to South Korean businesses, and it really does provide that opportunity for South Korean businesses to feed into government policy. So we're glad to provide that channel and to aggregate that for you all. But hopefully we've shown the importance of doing that today. Now, South Korea is generally at a crossroads of the renewable transition. There are global expectations from businesses that businesses they work with need to be 100% renewable and using 100% renewable electricity. This was mentioned a few times during the panel discussion. Gahi mentioned it. I've even had conversations with our members today that they've told me about companies requiring them to be using renewable electricity. This is a matter of competitiveness for South Korean businesses. Without a strong commitment and realizing these localized policy messages, South Korean businesses will lose out. However, with a strong commitment from the South Korean government to renewable electricity and enacting these localized policy messages, we'll see Korea continue to be a key export-orientated country that thrives from this transition happening in the world, this renewables revolution. And what we have laid out today with these localized policy messages is clear practical steps, the to-do list for the South Korean government to urgently address this transition. So thank you very much for today. I'd just like to do a quick round of thank yous. So firstly, to you all for attending, for giving up part of your day to be here and for participating in the event. So a round of applause to all of you for being here today, and thank you for participating. And very importantly, events like this cannot happen without the work of a lot of people behind the scenes. So thank you to the organisers, our partners here in South Korea, SFOC and COSIF, and the staff at both of those organisations have put in a lot of time to make sure this can happen today. So a round of applause for them as well. And finally, thank you to the speakers and panelists. I think you would all agree it's been a very interesting and informative discussion today. And they've put a lot of time in and thought into what they've said today. So thank you for them as well. Great. So that brings a close to the event, and we'll move forward to the closed door roundtable. Thank you very much for your time. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. I think it's time to wrap up today's launch event. Using renewable energy is no longer a choice or a must. Through the South Korea RE100 localized policy messages, I hope that we can foster an environment where RE is more expanded and penetrated into our businesses. Thank you again for your active participations, and let's end today's event with a big round of applause. Thank you very much.